Or what have you experienced in terms of the impacts on relationship because of all the different dynamics that have come out with lockdown?
And it's a time of people are very contained, having to be in the same house together where they don't want to be working in different places. So I think that it's in some ways it's been a very rich time of togetherness, but I'm also aware that it's also been a time for many people of profound stress and anxiety. And Anne, I think you've picked that up very much in your practice.
Yeah, very much so. I think we are in a time when there's a lot of change that's happening, and I think, as human beings, we like a little bit of certainty, and it helps us feel more comfortable. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, both locally and globally. And I think what happens when this sort of thing comes about, I mean, the changes are so fast, even, not just COVID, but the harbour bridge is closed, something else, and we all take it in our stride, but it does actually have an impact, whether we are aware of it or not. And I think we see that impact personally, where whatever anxieties are sort of hidden down here get activated, and certainly in our relationships. And sometimes that shows with actually feeling a little bit of distance in the relationship, a little bit of moving away, or a little bit of questioning. It comes out in a variety of ways, but we've certainly got there's a lot of work around.
And so I wonder, what does it mean, or what kind of thoughts or feelings do you have around what it means to truly be church?
I think church is actually about togetherness. If we really wanted to get into throwing around terms, the ecclesia, the gathered people of God. We're made as church to be gathered. We're made in the image of God. It teaches in the scripture in Genesis 1, 27, where the Trinity is alluded to. Man was created in our image, or in our likeness, depending on your translation. And so how do we actually represent this God who's about relationship when we can't be together?
What actually happens in relationships when we do go through these times of stress?
There are a range of questions that this proximity thing has brought out that goes to, if you like, what should be a microcosm of church, which is what we value is the long-term relationship that we, particularly as Christians, encourage to be a covenanted relationship of marriage, whilst respecting other forms of long-term relationship. And people start to ask that same question, which I think the church is asking: have we fallen out of love? Did we love it? Did this fellowship that we had, as in the church or in our own partnership, mean something? Or for those who may not be in a committed relationship, but are my friends for genuine? Have they kept in contact, or am I really alone? And I think there are various responses, and that very much come up on this need to be connected, to be attached, and which we're striking particularly with relationship therapy, as well as for individuals who are feeling some very lonely and disconnected and disappointed.
I agree totally, Rob. I think that church can give us a sense of belonging, and I think we need, as human beings, we need to feel like we belong somewhere. We are kind of rooted and grounded somewhere. And I think when we have that, we can actually cope with more things outside. But when we haven't got that, and then we're in this close proximity with COVID being shut down, locked down, in our bubbles, which sometimes our bubbles aren't necessarily exactly what we would like them to be. And so this creates a real issue for a lot of us. And so, then we go into our coping mechanisms, which usually involve some sort of disconnection in some way, or the opposite, a reaching out, but a reaching out in a way that actually isn't kind of helpful.
You kind of hit on something really important there, and I really love the way that you put that around the sense of, our belonging affects actually how we engage or cope with what's on the outside. And so if we're alone or don't have that sense of belonging for ourselves, it actually affects our sense of self, but our health and the way that we engage people and our world, And so you mentioned that, there's these different ways that people might cope with or respond to some of the stress or sense of isolation. And so what are some of the ways that people tend to respond to the distance or insecurity that they feel in relationships or in their their community?
First of all, I'll let Rob answer that, but I just want to make a comment about that, Mark. I think it's all of us. It's not people out there. It's every one of us. It's us here. It's just because we're therapists, we have marriages, and so it's we're all in this together.
Yeah, I think there's that question that underlies it. It's, are you really there? That's underlying it. If the people often say with church and they left, actually no one was really there when I went through that. So they leave and they don't come back. And I think in relationship, people have someone in the house, perhaps, contained in the bubble, but then the question is, but are you really there for me? And perhaps, and that's often expressed in an inverse way, where it finally comes out reactively, you're not there for me. And that's very distressing. Or perhaps in a not subtle way, but in a dig, well, you're the problem, which is not saying you're not there, but it's what's actually, what's underneath that is you're not there for me, so you're the problem.
And I think too that we are led to believe in our societies that we're meant to be autonomous. That is kind of raised as something that's really good.
Successful or something.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need anybody. that sort of concept, and I think it's ingrained in our societies. And I think the hardest thing I think human beings can cope with an awful lot. But being alone and coping with that is really, really difficult. And I think that's one of the definitions of trauma. It's not about going through trauma or the event, it's actually going through it on your own.
That's right.
And so I think, what Rob's alluding to, having our partner, our spouse, actually being able to hear us, to understand us, to kind of be able to be with us, is really, really key. And most of us, I don't think, realise how significant that is.
I wonder what hope there is for our future in terms of church or in terms of our significant relationships.
Well, first of all, I think, what is absolutely key is we have to remember we are never alone. Jesus, as Holy Spirit, is always with us. So we are never alone. God never leaves us. But we get that sense that we're on our own. And we certainly get that sense when our partner is not, our spouse is not there for us.
The beautiful thing with relationship, at whatever level relationship is when it's embodied, when it's about someone being there, an arm around the shoulder. It's that often just changes the whole face of things. That person, perhaps that older person, or that person who's been single without friends reaching, when someone comes and has a cup of coffee, that it's that very embodied sort of visceral presence that often changes the day, and actually it's like what means there does seems to be a hope. It's very practical.
Yeah, it is, eh? So as a church, we're God uses us to be hope for each other in the same way maybe in our marriage, right? Is like God's using both of us to reciprocate hope to each other. Yeah. By being there and answering that question, right?
Have the answers in the strategy, although strategy is important, but just by being there somehow it changes the face of things. That's where hope resides, I think.
And so you mentioned one of the kind of almost cliche responses before, which is hey, I just need to push through this. What might be some other cliche or kind of coping ways of responding to stress that you guys have come across?
Well, just push through, or another statement which has an element of truth but is inadequate also, is just build a bridge and get over it.
So what might that look like?
Well, exactly. I think that becomes the problem, because it's hard just to get over things if we're really hurting or really disappointed, and someone's saying just get over it and we'll build a bridge and go. That people actually get stuck on one side of the stream and just can't do that, because I think there's a really key element in that. It's actually about the fact that we just can't get over something that really hurts. If we've got someone who's able to actually hear our hurt, receive it and sit with us in the hurt, even if they're a part of that, that makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
It is the, the word emotion, emote, if we want to get into the Latin origin, means to move. We don't move anywhere if someone's not actually touching our pain.
What I've had to learn is say, well, actually my needs are real. They are real. Maybe the way I'm expressing them isn't helpful, but actually they are real and God has given me needs. So to start to acknowledge them as opposed to actually trying to push them down and say, oh look, just get over it. Or it's not a big deal, that sort of thinking.
And so what do you guys think are some of the sort of shortcomings or maybe like drawbacks or consequences to kind of coping with distress in community or in relationships through those ways?
I think a problem that we can talk about across a whole range of communities, whether it's a business organisation or whether it's the church or an intimate relationship or a friendship, is when there is often just a lack of acknowledgement. Perhaps we put a theology on that, like, we forget all about sin, so we shouldn't be raising them up anymore. After all, we know that they're all washed away. But that sort of bypasses the fact of actually acknowledging where there is hurt, where there is pain, where there is sadness. And I think that we haven't always done a good job of that in the church. We haven't always read the Psalms enough, which actually allow people to express pain and hurt and others to listen.
Like the church hasn't always done that, and actually in relationships we don't always do that, and so we lose that sense of teamship.
We do.
Right, and that sense of togetherness and belonging when we don't feel like we're for each other or there for each other,
Very much so.
So it makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
And I think in COVID, people have needed to be a team to work some stuff out, often strategically. What decision do we make for our finances, our business, our kids, our whatever might be coming up? But if indeed those underlying things are not being heard, even the pain, perhaps something that went wrong in the past pertaining to the way finances were happening, a decision with the family, etc., then it's very hard for people to actually make the effective decisions as a team.
It's kind of interesting, eh? Like it's like the picture you guys are painting is like, it's almost like, say, in the relationship or in church, like everyone almost wants to know if others are there with them. They don't feel it, and so we're all actually trying to cope with that. And so it's like we're almost fighting each other but we want the same thing.
Yes.
So does that kind of make sense?
Totally, Mark.
Very
In
much
fact,
so.
I think one of the big things that, as a therapist, I have realised is we do all want the same things. We do all have the same needs. We want to be loved. We want to be cared for. We want to feel special to somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean it's our spouse, but we do need to feel special to somebody. And yeah, these are really key needs. And obviously that connects in with our relationship with God, but it does also with others as well.
And I think so often we fight each other when we're trying to fight for a good cause, but we end up against each other.
So it's almost like, the enemy is not your partner. Like you're actually trying to deal with similar stresses, both in and like outside, but wanting to do it together. So you mentioned EFT. So do you just want to describe a little bit about like what EFT is and maybe just some of the basics behind that kind of approach to kind of relationship distress or like health?
What EFT does is it recognises that we're all the same, and every couple has a negative cycle, something that happens between them. And the other thing that happens is when a couple comes in, there's one of them that's usually, if not they're saying it, they're thinking it, that, you're the problem. I'm not the problem, you're the problem. And if only you did that, then we'd be okay. And so, but what EFT says is, what we teach is actually the problem isn't you and the problem isn't me. The problem is actually how we impact each other. And immediately, and this is one of the things I love about EFT, you've taken the focus of one person being the issue or one person being the problem. So then I talk about how the three of us will be fighting the negative cycle. And so that changes things completely. And sometimes you can almost see the men going,
Yeah. But it's even interesting, as you're saying that, I'm imagining the church. I'm like, it's so easy for us in the church to be like, oh, that person's the problem, or here's the problem. But actually, like, if there is an issue, we actually all play a part of that, right? Because we're here together.
yeah,
And to be a healthy church, to grow, it's very easy to pathologise a few people, but actually when a church can start to recognise that we're all part of this extended family and we all play a part, that's how a church grows up and grows together, and, if you like, grows up into Christ. And, if we think of intimate relationships, it's often so sad that people actually come to the end of their life with their partner and then are able to speak tenderly but never had all those years, I think we'd like to think that people can get some joy, good people who are trying really hard, as with good churches that are trying really hard, really start to enjoy being together now.
I was going to say, you mentioned the positive, those cycles or those that relationships and people can kind of get into.
Yeah. Well, people have a positive cycle because they obviously have fun times together, and especially at the beginning, if not later on, and so they can connect on certain levels. But often, well, always, there is also a negative cycle if you go on for any length of time, and so. Yeah, so what EFT does is it says, look, we need to get to know what your negative cycle is, because we need to have an awareness about it in order to be able to change it. And so that's where we start.
Can you tell us a bit about what those cycles are? Like what sort of cycles do you see kind of in the relationships that you come across?
Yeah. So there's basically three types of cycles. There's one which is the most common, which is what we call the pursue-withdraw. And so if you think about each couple in the relationship, we all want connection, whether we acknowledge it or not. That's what we're after. That's why we're in relationship. And so if we talk about this one as being the pursuer will actually go after the connection. All right? So if they can't get the connection, they will then start to do some things like snide comments or criticism or anything, because any connection is better than no connection. All right? Now the withdrawer wants connection as well, but actually sometimes doesn't kind of know how to respond and gets a bit wobbly on it. And so what they do is they often move away. All right? They move away not because they want to move away, but they move away because they don't want to make it any worse. All right? But of course, the more that withdrawer moves away, the more the pursuer pursues, the more the withdrawer moves away, and so on. You've got that negative cycle. Another one is the pursue, which can look a bit louder and can get escalated at times. And so you've got two kind of going like this. And you can kind of think of it as hens pecking each other, kind of, really, and not getting what they want, but trying to get what they need and want. All right. And then the third one is withdrawal. And so you've got a couple who are both wanting to keep the status quo, really, and not make it worse. And this cycle can actually look really good on the outside. I think it's actually often very relevant in our church context, our faith communities, because, you know, we're taught messages about submission and about service for others and selflessness, all of these type of messages.
Being at peace with each other.
Being at peace with each other, all these sort of things. We carry those messages with us, and we take them into our relationships. So this can actually look like one might say something and then maybe the other one doesn't kind of know how to respond, so kind of just backs off a little bit. And then this one might think, oh, maybe I've offended them, I shouldn't have said that, so they withdraw a little bit. And then they kind of don't know how to come together. So they have a very quiet cycle often, but it's not a connected cycle.
Yeah, and really important probably during like lockdown and things like that, because obviously the stress on those cycles has been heightened, right? And so you've got like two pursuers and they're already escalated and that's getting heightened and heightened, so the fights might be more, or the withdrawers, they withdraw from each other more, and so people might find themselves during a lockdown in terms of living in different rooms almost, you know. Or the other one, you've got one chasing the other one around the house, right? You know.
Yeah.
Or going off to their separate rooms. That actually becomes a major problem.
That's right.
Yeah. And if we were to come back to church, it's like a church where, in the end, the various divisions, department people no longer speak. They just avoid actually the elephant in the room. From the very beginning, you know, the humanity created in our image alludes to the God being one and yet being three beings. And the Greek term perikoesis, she refers to a dance, a dynamic dance. At even a modern Greek wedding, people will dance. And the idea that there are distinct dances yet almost becoming a blur in togetherness. We could think about the Trinity, but that's also placed into human relationship. That good relationship is not about becoming just merged without identity. It's about distinct people in communities, distinct people in family, and then if we come to the married relationship, distinct people within a marriage who have their own dances, but a dance that can either lead to a disconnect. Sir Johnson refers to the first dance as protest poker, where one person protests they can't get through to the other. It's about learning how to dance in a way where a couple feel that there's a synchrony between them, rather than a terrible disconnect. And of course, like with any dance, we do step on each other's toes, but that's the only way we learn to dance. So I guess, yes, there's a spiritual thing there we identify with, but there's a very real thing that belongs with being in community or being in this relationship that is a dance, inevitably a very embodied dance. And if I might say that even affects, I think, an issue that people often wonder why it's not mentioned, but if we come to a couple's love, that embodied physical love, why people no longer embrace, why people aren't close, why they don't cuddle, why they don't make love. It's all to do with this dance often. So yeah.
And so what, how do you think, like how do you see kind of like our faith kind of playing out through maybe like the different aspects of EFT in terms of how it gives us hope of what's next? Like where do we go next, do you know?
Yeah, we do have hope. And I think that, you know, one of the verses that I felt the Lord gave me and when I was 21 was Galatians 5:1. And it says, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore stand firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. And at the time I sensed it was about salvation. But I have seen time and time again over my life that actually he keeps on working at that yoke of slavery. And so I think these are the things that kind of trip us up in life. And, you know, I always say that, you know, with the aging process, you know, there's only so much, you know, a bit of makeup's going to do, you know. But actually, in Christ, I can continue learning until the day I die. You know, I can continue to ask him to, you know, chip away at that yoke of slavery, whatever it might be. And so, from that point of view, I think that there is always that hope that actually God is doing something in my life, and as a consequence, God is doing something in our life, my life, in my relationship as well. And I think that's really important.
That is really important, eh? Like, and I love that, and it kind of gives that sense too of, like, you know, as Christians, as Christ is towards us, and us as Christians, we're meant to be reconcilers. We reconcile with each other, like whether that's in our significant relationship, or we reconcile with each other as the church, and we're to try and reconcile and bring people into God's community in some way, you know. And so, yeah, like, I wonder how you see reconciliation, like, playing out.
Well, I think before we can talk about reconciliation, we have to talk about sin and shame. We can't. Now, there is a false guilt and a false shame that often is suffered. But reconciliation is based on openness, and if we again link this back to, you know, the scripture, the first chapter of Genesis, but and then further on into the second chapter, where it speaks of the man and his wife being naked but with no shame. And that nakedness is not just a physical thing. I think that was that they were able to be intimate, to see into each other, and to actually see God clearly when he walked with them, you know. And it is, I think, very clear, whether it's a community of faith or whether it's a long-term relationship, married relationship, it's actually about people actually being able to be open to each other and not feel that they were going to be punished for that. Because when that happens, then people can begin to hear each other's pain, to be seen and to be known, and in terms to work towards a thing, as reconciliation happens toward the end of a process. It's not possible always in all contexts, but I think it's that thing where the Christian faith has so much to bring.
And that's really interesting too, that we're created for connection with people who are like but also unlike us, you know.
Exactly.
And like, obviously, like, again, like, through all the stresses that we've been through this year, but even without them, you know, that brings its challenges, but as well as its beauty. You know, but I do like that overall picture you've painted of, hey, we're created for connection, that connection's been broken, there's distance there, and actually, like, our goal and our hope is that we're going to be able to reconnect with each other, both, again, in our significant relationships, yes, and as a church, and especially in our relationship with God on our side, you know. Yeah. And so maybe this is just a real good place just to bring it to a close. And I just want to say, Anne and Rob, just thank you so much for being here and bringing all that you've shared for our church today. And I know that, like, it's just a taste of maybe some of the experience and background you've got, but I know for myself and many others that this is going to invite us to begin to engage what it looks like to reconnect with each other and to belong together and to be with each other, and maybe to answer that really important question. Yes, I am here, you know, just as God is, just as Christ is, just as His Spirit is. He's always saying to us, hey, I'm here. Like, I'm not going to let you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Mm.